So welcome everybody. This is our fifth seminar together, our final one in the Plato on beauty and virtue. So obviously, I've said off the record before we start recording. Thank you all for joining us. We've been working together for 4 weeks. So the game plan for today is that you were to work on a piece and present it. And the value of doing this is it's always very valuable to a piece of writing or some kind of work in response to philosophical investigations. It helps you clarify your understanding and ideas. And might even shed light, because some of you have shared your projects, your essays with me prior. It helps shed even interesting lights of things that were, I was aware of, but I chose not to emphasize, for example, in the dialogue. So I think there's a lot of great value just for the group is to share their point of view and perspective on responding to the work, let alone where you want to go with these works, a response to this work in your own projects. So obviously the floor is going to be given, I'll rotate through the room, who's presenting, for those who said they are presenting. For those who are listening, just basically I recommend writing down notes if you have availability. I do that because after that person is complete, I'll give a cursor and I'll give some general open statements of response. And I encourage you all to reply back, basically points of agreement, points of consideration. Those are really useful both for the presenter to think about and for yourself to reflect and think about kind of getting understanding perspectives. That's the value of talking with each other, right? In the dialogos way, right? So with that said, let's start. And I'm just gonna call Kathleen. We'd love to have you present first.
Because I'm ladies first.
Of course, courtesy, always.
I took it very lightly because you said we can share a poetry or something. So I don't want to make it something very official. Otherwise, it increases the pressure to give something profoundly. So I was like, here, I told you the last couple of weeks I was in Italy and I was traveling around and I landed back here in Berlin. And today I was like thinking, okay, what shall I present? And I was contemplating, and the first thing that was coming up in my mind was a poem from Rilke. Maybe some of you know Ich lebe mein Leben in wachsenden Ringen. I will present it. And then I was thinking about things that I find beautiful. And I was also writing them down. The things that occurred to me in the last couple of weeks that were not just beautiful because that was a field of poppies, but a beauty that is still with me. Yeah, that still is inside me and that still makes me ponder and think about it. And then at the end, maybe I highlight something that I heard from the seminar that I relate to the beautiful things. So this would be my little presentation. Okay, so let me first of all start a little bit with this poem that I really like and that came out of me today from Rainer Maria Rilke. I first presented in German and then in English because in German it sounds much more beautiful. So I wish to invite you first of all to listen to it in German and then in English. So the poem is, Ich lebe mein Leben. Ich lebe mein Leben in wachsenden Ringen, die sich über die Dinge ziehen. Ich werde den letzten vielleicht nicht vollbringen, aber versuchen will ich ihn. Ich kreise um Gott, um den uralten Turm, und ich kreise Jahrtausende lang. Und ich weiß nicht, bin ich ein Falke, ein Sturm oder ein großer Gesang. So when we listen to this in English, I wrote it down. It hasn't got the exact melody. I live my life in widening circles that reach out across the world. I may not complete the last one, but I give myself to it. I circle around God, around the primordial tower. I've been circling for thousands of years, and I still don't know, am I a falcon, a storm, or a great song? So I was thinking, yeah, what was really beautiful, or what is beautiful for me, and maybe what also has changed over the last years. And yeah, I made a couple of notes. What I find really beautiful is, for example, a couple that I know that is always falling in love. Yeah, they have a dedication to beauty, or to the beautiful itself, and they also believe in something that is beyond of this physical world. And it's amazing, because when I'm with them, it's like a constant feeling of falling in love and being in flux, and constant like fluxation of coming and going, but it's always a very high state of being with them together. Yeah, that is what I really find beautiful. Mm. Since I'm a couple therapist, I'm supporting couples in their movement of getting in a relationship, or moving out of a relationship, saying goodbye, or sorting out things. And what I really find beautiful is, um, when a partner, it doesn't matter whom, identifies their egotistical patterns, and they got struck by something they discover about themselves, how egotistic they were, yeah, or how evil they were. And in these moments when this happens, this being struck by something, and the entire room can feel it, I find that very beautiful. It's a moment of an opening. It's a moment of something is opening up and is moving, but we are also somehow shocked about something that is coming out from something beyond. And I could give intellectual ideas what it is or where it is coming from, but this is not the point. The point is this moment of openness, and when we get struck by something that makes us shiver. I find beautiful when I see on Instagram a post about an old couple. I don't care if it's inscenated, but they are old and wrinkly, but they still kiss each other on the street. I find that beautiful. Um, I found beautiful, like when I was in Italy and I did like a hiking tour, and it was like a private hiking tour. And the guy was showing me plants, what his grandmother was using to clean the bottles. So you could see some really invisible, ugly plants that were covering the wall, but they had this strange sensation that that you can rub something and something will stick on it. I find that, I don't know, it's a picture inside me that is still resonating, that I know what this guy's grandmother was using 50, 60 years ago, and it's still growing there. Yeah, I was in Berlin. I was at the seminar, and then I finished with the summary. And this seminar, it was a masterclass about two mystics. One is called Marguerite Porete. She was a French mystic, and Meister Eckhart is a German mystic. You know, so we could compare Marguerite Porete. She is not so known, but she is in the same league as Eckhart or Dante. And when I was listening to this like lecture, I was struck by not just the things, for example, that Margaret was writing. She had a vision about free souls that live in this world and that liberate themselves from their virtues to be good all the time, because it leads us to exhaustion, but also to follow the rules. She has a love vision of free souls that live a simple life. But what really struck me there was that this lecturer, he was talking about humbleness, or yeah, how to say that, like he was giving an example, like Navalny, the opposer in Russia. He he got like poisoned in Germany or somewhere in Europe, and he didn't die, but he decided to go back to Russia, knowingly that he's going to die. Yeah, and the same I've heard from her Vita, that she was somehow convinced about an idea of a life that we can achieve, of beauty, of love, and of liberation. And the church wanted her to take her book back before it gets published and it's flying somewhere. And she decided she doesn't want to take back the statements that she was mentioning, because it was against the little church, as she called it, because she believed in a big life and not in a small life. So cut the long story short, I realize it's a little bit too complex, but what she decided is she's not taking back what she has written in her book. And she was for 1 year in prison, and then she knew she's going to die, because in the medieval age she's going to get burned. So she died because she got burned, and her book is still in the world, and people know or read about it, and they get enchanted by the texts, because they are full of these lines are full of soul, or full of being. Yeah. So I'm still sitting also with this beauty that is so, I don't know, there is someone connected to something that is a vision that goes beyond what maybe one could think about. Yeah, because it's so deep, it's so new, it's so radical, innovative. And she also decides to die. So I'm still struck with, like, how can someone decide to die, or to take themselves so much backwards or beyond that an idea or something can live? So I'm also struck, or still think about this beauty. Yeah, these are just little examples of something that I found beautiful in the last couple of weeks, or in the last month and a half.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So obviously what's fun, what I like about this, I could see some showing up dialogues in the poetry and your notes about it. So for example, this idea of the 1,000-year circling, I'm thinking of the Phaedrus, right, mythology account, right? So they're kind of circling around the gods for millenniums. I'm thinking of those examples. I'm seeing notes, even a note of like that's Am I a Great Song? I'm thinking of that note from Phaedo, basically as a soul is a harmony. So I'm thinking about kind of this, the nature and the structure, kind of this question of identity of your in this operation of the beloved and love around beautiful, the kind of what is the stasis of you? Are you the falcon, storm, or a song? I'm thinking of this kind of the state of nature of who you are in that state. I think also the kind of notion of you're bringing up these ideas of the kind of striking open, right? So you're talking about this idea and working in the work of therapy, and it's like in the psychologia, right? Kind of the working of with patients to draw out a striking of understanding, right? A striking of seeing something anew about themselves. So I think I'm seeing notes of that. So that's from Phaedrus, for example. And the idea of the, kind of your general note, just kind of beyond, a little bit beyond these dialogues we read together, but I think also in the Platonic thought, for example, I've always I apology we can point out about Socrates' willingness to go die. You're to live, I'm to die. We'll find out which one has a better life. I think also really important is Credo, because that's a moment where Plato really does have the choice to leave. He can leave. He has the opportunity, and he accosts his friend and persuades him to say the right thing is to stay to die for the reasons that presented in that dialogue. And I think the last note is this idea of the mystic you brought up, and the idea of making a choice to go beyond the limit. I'm thinking of things like the theological virtues taught from Thomas Aquinas. So the idea that the theological virtues or the idea that by God is beyond the mean. So doing things towards him is actually the right thing to do. So I'm thinking of notes of that. And you can see that through the kind of generative work that this writing endures because it has this kind of contact with the beloved. So I think in general, what I'm sensing, kind of picking up both from the poem and your commentary about it, is kind of the nature of time, of participation, of what endures, but in basically enduring movement, right? Kind of the kind
Yes.
of drawing from Parmenides, kind of the drawing out of the kind of the dual nature that the
Yes.
beautiful seems to have that relationship of enduring movement, the kind of
Yeah.
the phusis and gigonomai we talked about in the lecture series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also felt like what really was striking for me was this elevation, this elevation from the dualistic world into the non-dualistic world, or into from the physical into the everlasting. Like, her book is still alive, but she is dead. So I was like also drawing on that, the connection of the physical and the non-physical, of the dualistic and ecstatic world, because like this couple that is constantly falling in love, it's kind of an ecstatic state that has a different time. I was also thinking about the ladders of beauty. Like, I could also mention some simpler things, but I thought there are higher states of beauty. Yeah, like, it's not a physical body that is attractive, or I don't know, an apple that I see. It had a richer complexity on the ladder of beauty.
Yeah. Yes. For example, in your poem, your idea of the kind of the widening circles, right? The widening circles that are
Yes.
incomplete, right? So I can see the reference to that. That's excellent.
And maybe also this connection of let me think about what I wanted to say. Yeah, this connection about beauty and love and soul. Yeah, somehow this that love and beauty is somehow connected in the relationship with the couple, or in the couple therapy. And I remember what you also said in the sessions, that we are the doctors of the soul if we are supporting the conversation of the couple. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And drawing out, right, a new understanding, right? A newness,
Yeah.
uh, in a kind of revelational state. Yeah, excellent. Very
So
good.
for me, it was like just taking a summary of what I find beautiful and looking back into my notes, what we have discussed over the last times. And I could relate to the things you have been mentioning or we were discussing. So it's for me like an integration.
Yes, very good. Yeah, anybody can share. If this is the opportunity to sharing reflection from Kathleen's uh, poem, as well as uh, commentary about it. I don't know German, so unfortunately, I can't make a commentary about the poetic structure of the German version.
Hi, Kathleen. I really enjoyed that poem, even though I don't speak German. I like the cadence of the language and the words, stern, etc., various of the words. You mentioned about seeing an elderly couple, and a very close elderly couple that have obviously been together for a long time. Do you feel like that's something that is inherent in people, or is it something that can be learned? That being able to stay together for a long time.
I think that can be learned, but you need to have probably like a goal, or you need to have this inner motivation, or this dedication. You want to make it work, or even though maybe you have even a set of beliefs, like a set of values that will keep you there, but to be in this state for a very long time, I don't know, you either have great virtues, or you believe in this idea of love. I don't know if I can answer this question correctly, but yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
The borrow on that point, just to build on that issue, can we use the Aristotelian accounts? That'd be the friendship of virtue is about that participation awareness of something that's enduring beyond utility and pleasure. So in this case, it would have to be an orientation to the noble. In this case, a kind of devotion, right, to something beyond the individuals in the group. That's a very good question, though. Appreciate that, James. Anyone else? Any other reflections?
Just wanted to say to Kathleen that I also really enjoyed the poem. I love that particular poet, and also I really enjoy his sculptures. I find them to be quite beautiful. So one question to Kathleen is, you've mentioned humbleness, which is
Yes.
yes, which is the virtue associated with humility.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate a bit more how it connects with our understanding of beauty?
Mm. 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 I mean, when we take the word humbleness, being humble, I was looking into this today. It comes also from humus, yeah. Like, and I find it very interesting. Like, humbleness is being not devoted, but you are very close to earth. You create humus for something to nourish that is beyond yourself. That would be my interpretation. Yeah, you are close to earth. You are taking care of maybe of others. You don't need to be the first one that is going to speak up all the time. You see something beyond yourself. You maybe you forget about yourself. So the worst like case scenario, and that's why I'm still disturbed by this. Navalny goes back to Russia and dies because there is something that is exceeding this humbleness. This Margaret that she is dying is there is too much of this. What is it called? Self-redemption or self-reduction. Yeah, it's excessive, but in a way it's beautiful because I believe it gives space to lots of things that, you know, we said in our first session, the soul is troubled if we keep things too small. Like if we say, as Scorpio says, form follows function, if we make architecture that is just following this principle or this logic, our soul repels. So if we cultivate humbleness uh, and allow things that can grow with our humus beyond ourselves, we also increase the space that invites possibility and invites something that is beyond myself and maybe the others. It can reach different layers or circles. So that's why I would say it adds to beauty.
Thank
To,
you.
bu-
Thank you very much.
to build on that point, so if the actually again to plug Johannes's course on economic ethics, as we learned from there, philia, basically friendship, is wishing the good of the other as other. Remember the main concept we talked about in our course, the idea of what happens if we don't treat goodness and beauty as equivalent. You switch the term. You get a different result. There might be potentially a different result. I would kind of point that out. It's basically if friendship is wishing the good of the other, what would be wishing the beautiful of the other? Because that kind of leads to this drawing on this point what Kathleen's pointing out about, like, basically part of the humility, kind of simpleness, is kind of getting out of the one way you can interpret is getting out of the way, right? Basically not being so self-important, to get out of the way. I say that more in the sense of, like, because that's the point, is that's not just wishing the good of the other for your own sake. It has to be for the other as other. It's that normal mode of friendship. So that's why I'm drawing it out, just to point out what would be the difference if we switch that meaning from wishing the good of the other for wishing the beautiful, for example. But great question, Harris. That was excellent. Mills or Chance? Was your hand up before?
Yeah, I just had a short observation. The example of the couple who's continuously falling in love with each other and constantly discovering new things about each other. I really loved that. It's something I aspire to in my own marriage because a lot of times we necessarily have to like create internal representations and to some degree schematize. But I love this idea of being open to these representations being changed and updated. And I think beauty is a living process.
Yeah.
And what came to mind in this example was Adrian Bajan's constructal law. So this is even relevant in like other domains like engineering and stuff. But it states for a finite sized system to persist in time, to live, it must evolve in such a way that it provides easier access to the imposed currents that flow through it. And if we consider the other as an inexhaustible source of flow, you know, being open to it and allowing it to flow through us and to not become stagnant is key, and it's true everywhere. And I really appreciate what you presented and shared.
Thank you.
That's a really interesting point, right? Because basically the theory of entropy, right? That closed systems will eventually, basically by necessity, go to an entropic state. That's a really interesting point, Mills, about what you just said. Because the idea, if we have an orientation about the other, not in an image of goodness, right? Basically, because every good is kind of, it's, again, remember that language from Symposium, right? Love is basically the everlasting possession of qua good, basically, in that example we talked about there. That sets up a kind of, and I remember, Kathleen, we talked about this, part of the problem in emotional in personal relationships is these stultified images. Like almost all the pain that comes from is from these images in our heads and the tensions that come from that. So what Mills is presenting here, one of the ways that if we treat the other as a basically ever-generating newness from that, it creates, it has potential, it could address that issue of closed systems having entropy and outcomes, basically of introducing new variation, new energetic activity instead. Yeah, very good. Excellent.
And Marguerite Porete is writing about this. If you want to follow up on her, she is writing not directly about couple, but I think about this humbleness. Yeah, when you are like, when you are getting humble, because like in mature couples, what you can see is that they have a very high grade of individualization. Like they know who they are, so they don't need to prove something. They know what, they are aware of their strengths. They are also aware of their weaknesses, but they have a lot and a lot of I don't know, maybe dedication or respect, or I don't know, to life, that they can take themselves back. And with this taking yourself back, so much more can flow in. I think there is like a correlation between what she is promoting and this being into being as a couple, when things can flow in and out, because you don't take yourself, you are important, but you're also not so important.
Yeah, I'll have to look her up. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Really appreciate it. You can raise your hand if you'd like to present next. Please raise your hand via the Zoom thing. The Zoom mechanism. Thank you, Mills. Appreciate it. Floor is yours.
Okay, so I wrote an essay for my presentation today, and it is titled, let me pull it up here. It is titled The Shameless, and I'll put quotes around that, Shameless Temperance of Socrates. In this essay, I will explore how Socrates exemplified the life of temperance through the practice of dialectic and an unwavering humility. I will introduce a hypothesis that he, in examining the beliefs of others, was also simultaneously examining his own, and by means of this, cultivating his soul. In Greater Hippias, we see a certain excellence on display in Socrates' approach to the testing of the ideas of Hippias, who is accustomed to ready assent from his audiences. In the figure of Hippias, one is almost reminded of the martial arts instructors who confer no practical skills to their students, but instead engage in choreographed displays of supernatural powers, where a wave of the master's hand seems to send a half dozen attackers flying across the mat. Such a person will avoid at all costs any contact with an actual contender who is not willing to enter and maintain the master's paracosm. Socrates was indeed such a contender, but to actually test the supposed wisdom of the sophist, he had to signal that he was an ally, someone who was a polite gentleman who would never violate the fragile shell of his false coherence. From Greater Hippias at 288 D, quote, Socrates, who is the fellow? What an uncultivated person who has the face to mention such worthless things in a dignified discussion. Socrates, that's the kind of person he is, Hippias, not elegant, but vulgar, thinking of nothing but the truth. But nevertheless, the man must be answered. Close quote. So for the purposes of this essay, I would ask you to grant me an intuitive reading of this passage. Socrates split himself in two. One half was this agreeable gentleman, and the other, this mysterious interlocutor whom Socrates alludes to and would have to later spar with in defense of these positions which he was acquiring from Hippias. If so, it would appear that this is a purely beguiling move worthy of Odysseus, but more on this later. In Meno, at 80a, Socrates is challenged on the grounds that his dialogues only ever produce a state of doubt in his interlocutors, and worse yet, no positive knowledge is arrived at as he himself remains in doubt. Socrates acknowledges this without contest at 80c, but he goes on to demonstrate the value of that state of doubt in the geometry lesson. When questioned about how to proceed in producing a space double that of a given square, the boy replies that it is the product of doubling the length of the sides, 82e. This specific belief that he held, or perhaps which held him, is put to the test and found to be wrong, leaving him in a fresh state of unknowing. By means of this torpedo's shock of aporia, the slave boy is relieved of the disabling constraint of false certainty. Not only was it impeding the boy's abilities, but it was observed in 84b that such false beliefs may even be shared with others who could possibly then become captives themselves. By way of doubt, Socrates opened the prison door of ignorance, which is a good, and not only for the one imprisoned. Only upon exiting this prison, or perhaps cave, did the boy come to realize that he had been in one to begin with. He was ignorant of his own ignorance. Looking back to Greater Hippias and this division of the self which Socrates appears to have engaged in what appears to be a masterful use of tact and guile, it occurs to this observer that there is more than meets the eye to this move. In hearing the false beliefs of another, such a belief is necessarily made explicit and exposed to the light of day. If, inside of the listener, there lies the makings of this same false belief in a latent, unarticulated state, it may begin to hum and become operational, inspiring a desire to assent by the allure of the restful state of certainty. One could use this as an axiom. It could serve as knowledge upon which other beliefs can be based, for a time at least. But the lover of wisdom, the temperate man, Socrates, in his fidelity to the Logos, would not, perhaps could not settle for a false coherence, but would instead find his joy in being relieved of such traps and free to pursue the highest good. From all this, it is my own hypothesis that in Greater Hippias, this part of his split self which feigned assent was not entirely feigning assent. In Apology at 38a, Socrates says, quote, and if again I say that to talk every day about virtue and the other things about which you hear me talking, and examining myself and others is the greatest good to man, and that the unexamined life is not worth living, you will believe me still less. And here I would like to reiterate this part about examining myself and others is the greatest good to man. I believe that Socrates, in his depth of self-knowledge and its attendant humility, understood that in the ecology of his own mind, there would always be some element which was ignorant of its ignorance, and that would be tempted to believe in falsehood. This part I would associate with the unruly horse described in the myth of the charioteer in Phaedrus at 246b. Earlier in Phaedrus at 237d, it is observed that, quote, in each of us, there are two ruling and leading principles, which we follow whithersoever they lead. One is the innate desire for pleasures, the other, an acquired opinion which strives for the best, end quote. Of these two aspects, the former principle is the one I would indicate, as there is a certain pleasure in the slumber of agreeing with others and holding popular opinions, the prominent vice of Hippias. Rather than attempting to stifle or ignore this part, he drew it out of himself by allowing it to experience an assurance of this pleasure that lured it to the surface, like a parasite, where it could be more easily extricated and subdued. This pattern is not limited to greater Hippias alone. Each interlocutor, no matter how silly or pretentious they may seem to the reader, brings something that Socrates himself perhaps, and if we have the humility and honesty, something that we, the readers, may hold to be true in a very implicit manner. In my reading of Plato's dialogues, there is a motif of agreement between Socrates and his interlocutors, which is not insincere, yet is always followed up with a problematization. It is the two aspects of sophism working in tandem, the subduing of the passions with restraint, and the ceaseless, unrestrained pursuit of the best. It would follow that vice, the lack of temperance, can likewise be twofold: a lack of restraint concerning desires for the imminent, which is called excess, and or a restraining of that noble horse which seeks after the best, the beautiful itself, which is called deficiency. It would be no stretch to say that the dedication of Eros towards the pursuit of the best, the beautiful itself, would indeed be virtue, as demonstrated by Diotima's ladder in Symposium at 211c. When we fail to value the beautiful itself, our soul is in a state of arrested development. And as a consequence, we fail to aspire to and cultivate higher virtue. Having examined all this at a larger scale, this fidelity to the pursuit of the best may indeed appear, at the ground level and to the common man, to be a kind of shamelessness. The temperance of Socrates engenders perpetual movement towards the best, which in the course of things is not restrained by these unwritten rules of politeness on such occasions when they are a cover for the slumber of vice. In fact, obedience to man's customs in such cases would be disobedience to the god, as he puts it in Apology at 37e. In the closing of Greater Hippias, Socrates says the following, quote, so it has come about, as I say, that I am abused and reviled by you and by him. Here I hypothesize that he's referring to that split part of himself. He continues, but perhaps it is necessary to endure all this, for it is quite reasonable that I might be benefited by it. The benefit he alludes to would appear to be the cultivation of his soul. In closing, we would do well to learn, like Socrates, to seek aporia as an act of piety and to take it as an occasion for rejoicing. In this spirit, I leave you with a quote from the exemplary Niels Bohr, who said, how wonderful that we have met with a paradox. Now we have some hope of making progress. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. You know, again, Mill, I saw a draft of this earlier in the week, and I'm very happy with the end result of it. I think for various reasons. I think one is, this is just, I kind of love when kind of synchronicities occur kind of accidentally, because obviously I don't think you were talking to Kathleen prior to writing this. So as a result, the kind of overlap of humility showing up is really interesting from hearing these two exchanges right now. I think another note is just I think he did a very good job threading the dialogues together. I think it did a very good job connecting the Greater Hippias with the Phaedrus mythology of the horse, right? And then I think that connection argumentation there was very good. with Phaedrus as well. So you actually pulled 3 of those dialogues together, plus one outside the course, which was apology. I think that was done very well. I think also just again, Johannes has his class on Nicomachean ethics coming up. Is one of the notes of virtue, right? A friendship of virtue is that you actually have another self. When one is in virtue, actually participating with it, you actually are fully self. Like that's kind of actually one of the argumentations or presentations of it. So I'm just saying that what I'm saying here is the kind of presentation. And by the way, and it's actually, I had a note in about Gorgias. There's actually a note where Callicles is basically making that very, very aggressive challenge to Socrates about the nature of philosophy. Do a little bit of it, but don't bother with too much of it. You look childish. You look like a child. You look ridiculous doing this as a grown man. The response is, he first thanks him. Hey, if my soul was gold, now I have something to test the metal of my soul. Because that's the point, is that these interactions with Plato, again, I think your argumentation is very cogent and I think very solid. I think you gained a lot. I think you did a great synthesis of the dialogues of what we covered in this course, as well as some addendums from Plato as well. And actually shed light on Kathleen's initial notes or meditations on humility, I think, from what you discussed this. The nature of the aporic state and how, and becoming aware of what one is lacking. I think actually that argumentation also of basically that dual mode of temperance. I know in the group we had some contentions about that, or just tensions about it, because the traditional mode of temperance being the shutting down, kind of closing off, reining in, versus this appearance of this kind of basic running forward or towards. I think he did a very good job of synthesizing the discussion from that course, from that seminar, to I think a very cogent presentation. So very good, Mills, very good work. The floor, raise your hand if you'd like to talk. And I'll call you out. We'll do a more formal organization here. Any reflections on response to what Mills wrote? Harris.
Yes, it was really excellent essay and then delivery. I really also like this synchronic aspect in terms of the 2 presentations so far. One of the common things that I would like to highlight, and even pose as a point towards chance for a further elaboration, let's say. You said that aporia, the Socratic aporia, it's an act of piety. And that's a really profound statement. And because in a way, it blends this humility, but also it evokes a sense of sacredness, let's say, towards the whole topic. And yeah, can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
You know, I was originally going to title it the shameless piety of Socrates. Because, yeah, it's religious what he's doing. I think, you know, again, it has to do with an openness to what's inside coming through you and changing you, and being dedicated to that, and that being the basis of your persistence, rather than trying to be like a statue. And you can't really do that without arriving at aporia, because I think that shock of aporia is necessary to break up these ossified structures. So yeah, it's like a duty. You can't do without it.
You know, it's interesting you brought the idea of kind of the opposition to this is statue, basically being stultified, kind of calcified, rigid, right? Because you mean a notion of certainty, right? Basically that if you use a false premise, you can sit there in certainty about it, versus taking on the challenge of being entered into a state of aporia where you're aware that you have nothing with you at the moment and you have to continue forward with that. I only say that because I made a note about it with the Algama, right? That is in Symposium. It's actually, it's in Phaedrus as well. So when this idea of the basically which god you assign yourself with the statue, to assign with it, it means it also can mean redound, basically glory, basically the redound glory within, kind of quality to it. So that's just kind of a riffing, kind of playing off the basic on that concept of saltified kind of other, basically saltifying, cutting out the other by sitting in certainty versus allowing otherness to kind of flow through. I'm just playing with that point. Good. That's good. That was a good point though, by Harris. Appreciate you asking that question. Okay. James, floor is yours.
Hi, Chance. As you were speaking there, a question came to mind, and I wondered if you thought that the gap between Socrates and his interlocutors was their desire to know, as in fixed knowledge, just to know something and then, forget about it, and Socrates' sort of genuine philosophical desire to continually ask why and to accept all we know is that we don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And in my hypothesis, I think he allowed himself to genuinely experience the holding of that belief and then to sacrifice it. And that's painful. It's unpleasant, but I think he had a degree of mastery over this process. And I think he was trying to bring other people into, that process, which sucks at first. It hurts a lot, but you kind of get used to it and it becomes a way of life. So yeah, I think he was trying to bring them out of their little hidey hole and into the flow of reality.
To build on that, probably, if you remember from the Meno dialogue, where this exact question gets brought up, it's like, what do you mean? You're just going to stay here? How can we know anything? Basically, this kind of this question point is brought up in Meno. Socrates does have affirmations of faith. Like, he does state that, no, we can come to know. Basically, the idea of intermediary states, right, of love. Because I would just say, basically, the short note is Plato doesn't want to just know things. He wants to love. Right, because he wants to be in that state of love as well as to know. So I think that'd be part of the kind of drawing out of what we're talking about. Basically, the kind of not one of the gaps is that Socrates as a character really does have this love of virtue. He wants to come to know it, and has a love and pursuit of it, right? And he's kind of like his interlocutors, his challenge that they're kind of coming in so confident when they know what they are. They kind of basically stultified. And not willing to engage with it, not willing to engage. I also say that because remember, he was very confident of knowing what love is, right? He was a student of love. He was like, he taught from Diotima love to work with that too. So that's why I'm bringing this up. So the operation and nature of love to knowledge is a very important issue here.
Yeah, I think there's necessarily a certain open-handedness that has to accompany knowledge and love. It's like if you close your grip around it, then that's no good. But if it's true, then it will not leave you.
Very reminiscent. I see a lot of harmony with the notes with Kathleen and my relationships, just from this image in my mind, thinking what you just said there, Mills. Excellent.
Thanks, James.
Thank you. Great work.
Yeah.
So, James, do you have a presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, please. Floor is yours.
Okay, so this is starts a bit dark, but hopefully it's got a happy ending. So this is called Logic, Beauty's Bodyguard. This is going to be beautiful, he thought. The masked shooter checked through his kit bag as he set up his sweet spot above the crowd. Rifles, check. Enough ammunition to wipe out a football stadium, check. Live stream equipment to reach as broad an audience as possible, check. He'd planned this to a T. These worms are going to pay today, the shooter said to himself. I'm going to break all the records. No one is ever going to forget my name. The shooter put his eye to the scope and pulled the trigger as all hell broke loose. Or take the character John Doe in the film Seven. After his capture for a series of gruesome murders in the style of the Seven Deadly Sins, in order to punish what he sees as a decadent society. Doe recounts to his arresting officers, Mills and Somerset, "I'm not special, but this is, though, what I'm doing, my work. And when it's finished, it's going to be beautiful. People won't barely be able to comprehend, but they won't be able to deny. I'm setting the example, and what I've done will be puzzled over and studied and followed forever." When presented with such terrible scenarios as those above, how can we argue against the shooter's belief that a mass killing, or any other act of evil for that matter, cannot in fact be beautiful, without any discussion of aesthetic consideration, to degenerating into the well-worn trope of, "Well, that's just your opinion, man"? In this essay, I hope to be able to critique the Platonic dialogue Meno, but find solace in the logic of the greater Hippias, to make just such an argument and not let evil have the last word on beauty. I say critically because I do not think that Plato's articulation of Socrates' argument in Meno quite captures the motivations of mass shooters and others who find something beautiful in the terrible destruction they wreak. For example, Socrates' argument in Meno appears to be that at least some who choose evil do so out of ignorance, quote, that they desire what they suppose to be good, although they are really evils, end quote. Applying this in a charitable way to the mass shooter scenario, it sometimes appears that the shooter is desperate to be heard and seen because they are hurting in some way. This shows that the shooter is motivated by something perhaps good, the need to articulate one's pain. Yet this desire has become so perverted and evil through misery that the perpetrator comes to believe that the only way of being heard is through an act of extreme violence. Therefore, for Socrates, no one really desires to be evil, since evil is a state of being that arises from suffering and misery, and no one really desires to be miserable. However, in contrast to Socrates' argument in Meno, I would argue that post-Nietzsche, evil can indeed be beautiful. That's the law of nihilism, the desire to destroy oneself out of spite at existence and cause as much suffering to those around in the process as possible. There is genuine jeopardy here. As the saying goes, the devil has all the best tunes. And I'm sure our group doesn't need any reminding of Nietzsche's infamous dictum, when one gazes into the abyss also gazes into you. The risk of corruption is real, for contrary much of contemporary liberal thought, that violent media isn't corrupting in itself. It just appeals to people who are those who are already disturbed in some way. If no violent or degenerate media could ever inspire anyone to commit acts of violence themselves, then the corollary would also have to be true, that no great or edifying art could ever inspire. Where I find Socrates' argument in Meno to be of greater power in defending beauty from evil is in the contemplation of the positive role of dark or disturbing artwork in contemporary society. When Socrates says that, quote, "those who are hurt are miserable in proportion to the hurt that is inflicted upon them," this speaks to the, end quote, this speaks to the possibility that dark or disturbing art has a morally edifying aspect to it, in that while they are not the type of artwork one would hang on the living room wall, the artist's creation as the vessel of their suffering often holds up a reproachful mirror to something sick within society and points an accusatory finger saying, "Heal thyself." Take the drawings of H.R. Giger, for example, famous for his designs which form the unsettling alien of the eponymous film franchise. Giger's work is dark, disturbing, demonic even, yet one cannot deny the technical skill of his penmanship. Or pick almost any painting by Francis Bacon, perhaps starting at the less intense end with his paintings of Pope Innocent X. One critic states that these paintings, in which the Pope appears to be disintegrating with a terrible scream on his face, are Bacon's attempt to portray Nietzsche's death of God through the evaporation of his representative on earth. A further insight into whether dark art can have any edifying qualities comes from a discussion Georgios, Axel, and I were having about this subject in one of the early breakout rooms. Georgios mentioned that in the book of Revelations, the city of the New Jerusalem is still surrounded by walls. Yet why does the New Jerusalem need walls? My understanding of Georgios's answer was that he speculated the walls could symbolize a barrier outside which evil still exists, but that these walls can expand outwards as humanity improves and claims more ground for the kingdom of heaven. Again, this is the function of unsettling artwork in modern society, as it acts as a kind of reflective corrective, so that the maladies afflicting society are revealed to it through the very artwork it produces. Or to paraphrase J.G. Ballard, challenging art, quote, rubs the human face in its own vomit and forces it to look in the mirror, end quote. So, after all that darkness, here comes greater Hippias to the rescue, hopefully. Through his famous dialogic method of stripping away contradictions, in the Greater Hippias, Socrates arrives at 3 suggestions as to what the beautiful is: the appropriate, the useful, and the beneficial. This logical triumvirate unlocked recollections of the Platonic forms to me, and I imagined what I hope was a very Greek and logical solution to the problem of beauty and evil in the shape of a square. If we imagine a square with 4 corners, in the top left we place good, in the bottom left we place truth, in the top right we place beauty, and in the bottom right we place evil. With this image, it is possible to map out the relationship between these qualities. So, for example, the positive relationships between the good, the beautiful, and truth are obvious. However, the relationship between evil and these qualities is more nuanced. As I've argued, evil can have its dark beauty, and evil can even reveal something true, such as the suffering of an individual revealed through a criminal act, or the suffering of a society acting as the artist's muse. However, what this square reveals is that good and evil cannot amalgamate. They stand in stark contrast with each other. In conclusion, then, yes, evil can be beautiful. That's its dangerous and seductive quality, but it cannot be good. That's just a logical contradiction. The end.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I know that's been, James, your main project or main question up to this point. And actually, I remember, I think, yeah, it was in response to, I was just sharing some notes. Yeah, I was sharing some notes from one of my one-on-ones I did about the nature of basically hate and love, right? The contradiction, basically the oppositions. And the main tension there is the question of what do we mean? Which love do we mean? Do we mean eros? Do we mean philia? Do we mean strogos, for example? Which one are we referring to, and what are their oppositions of that? This is actually great. This is actually a very important attribution or point. So what we're saying here is, basically the tension part about appearances versus reality. That tends to be the issue. So, because that's presented in Meno, that's over there. It's also in Greater Hippias as well. So that's definitely a fundamental point. Like that's part of one of this niche of this course was to kind of investigate that through. I think in particular, actually, the Meno ones are actually really important, right? Because that whole point you brought up there about the done out of basically actions that are evil done out of ignorance because there's an apparent good. I think that's actually very important. It was right before, like that line of dialogue, that section was a note where virtue was pointed out as the desire and possession of basically kalos, right? And then there was a question of convertibility. Can we convert basically everything that is good, basically beautiful, basically a good? That was the question. And everything was pursued forward from there. So the question of convertibility of these terms is actually a very serious point. And we said that a couple of times in these dialogues, that a lot of times the discussion of beauty as were initially presented and then switched for the good, and the rest of the discussion moved on from there. That does have consequences, basically, which one they apply to. Because I think actually also a very big part about the nature of basically the Francis Bacon painting, for example, basically they are images that are meant to heal us because they present, it's almost like a diagnostic tool in the sense that it's basically like a scan of a cancer, right? Or some kind of instrument. It's instruments that present by their appearance of a malady or misfunction or some kind. I think that's very fair because that's basically the nature of privation. You know, one of the things I talked a lot about with this group was the privational account of that's basically saying that things that do not have being or in privational state, they participate with it, but they don't have, but they are in degrees of less. That's basically the chain of being presentation. That's very important because, as you said, Nietzschean, any kind of modern philosophy would have this is the tension point of issue here. So what I understand is the summary point, though, is that also, by the way, I just want to know like that presentation from greater hippies of the appropriate, useful, and beneficial. They all are defeated. They're all shown to not be the beautiful. So that's part of the tension. Is that those things seem those are all goods, right? So that's the fun part about this. They kind of like, you got some. Plato tries to give you something to work with here, but these will tend to falter in different ways. I do like this diagram idea. It is very useful to help draw that out. I do want to point out that I do like that strategy of it because you're using it to make an argument that basically there's almost a strong contradictory separation of goodness and evil that truth and beauty can connect with. There's a touch in contact with somehow. The privational. Go on. Sorry, James.
And I was specifically thinking of the Greek context there because, you know, having studied Heidegger, etc., with Johannes and the danger of, you know, picture thinking and how that become rigid, but it seemed to specifically apply as we've been studying there. You know, there are texts and passages that we've read in other Greek thinkers where they do draw these kind of logical diagrams, and that really came back to me in thinking about this here. You know, putting that on the page really, even though it's quite a simple diagram, it really does show the distance between good and evil in a way that the other things sort of kind of had some relationship with them, whereas they were sort of poles apart.
And like we saw in Meno as well, for example, like the whole geographic diagrams demonstrations instruments can give you instruments of understanding. So yes, it's very true. That's very good. I think actually on that operation, I do want to point out that usually a good strategy is to see if the term we're using is the same meaning by showing its inverse. That's actually a very good strategy to come to if we know they mean the same thing. So for example, like the opposition of truth is falsity, as an example. So I think that those might be useful instruments to think about kind of through a diagrammic process. Because I do the same thing too. I use that a lot to help draw distinctions out. Because actually, just riffing on a note from that one-on-one discussion on hate, right, and its contrary, which one are we referring to with that? Nihimachian ethics is a really interesting point because there's an idea of kind of the opposite of stergo, which is it's a kind of care loving. It's kind of associated with philia in that way. Its opposition is basically it gets translated as like discomfort being near, kind of like the translation of that. That'd be the opposition of Nihimachian ethics that Aristotle uses there. I think those are so. I think that'd be kind of my main note as feedback is that I like the thought process behind it. And I think it's very systematic and use the dialogue in a very effective manner. Yeah, but I think definitely the due note is this question of because the problem with goodness, actually, that's actually, again, Nihimachian ethics plug for Johannes. Aristotle makes a point that the problem with goodness is as a term, it has equivocal qualities. Because what do we mean by that? So the same tension points about drawing out what beauty means, goodness has the same issue. Because sometimes goodness can be related to pleasure, its utility, and its virtue. So it has actually those kind of qualities attached to it from Nihimachian ethics, way it's drawn out. So just think that's just something to chew on and think about. Yeah. Anyone have any thoughts or reflections? Mills, floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to share an appreciation for the way you discuss dark art and like violent video games and things like this. That's a powerful point there, that if we buy the argument that, you know, these things have no impact on people, then we have to also discount the value of great art and things like. I think that was a very, very powerful point. But I wanted to reinforce that a little bit. I cannot find the quote exactly, but William James said that music communicates ontological messages. So if we're consuming dark content, it is informing our ontology. Like it's telling us what reality is. It's necessarily changing us. And which also brings to mind Plato's critique of like the poets and the myths in Republic. So I wonder if there has to be some artificial mechanism in order to control this, because this stuff gets economically reinforced. So it brings up some difficult questions in the tension between, you know, freedoms and proper constraints. I too had a little bit of an issue with the way evil was described in Meno, because, you know, I can't help but think that there are some people who, if they could, would press a button and erase all of existence. Nothing would exist, not even a record of their actions or anything like that. And in such a case, I can't help but think that that's not any kind of an ignorance, you know. I think that's radically different than these typical forms of evil, where it's like, you know, people want views or they want to affect people's beliefs in some way through their actions. This confrontation with absolute nihility is a different matter, it seems. But
Go on.
I did have one question. I understand evil to be necessarily parasitic. That is, it can't generate anything. And it relies on something outside of itself to, you know, have its being. I wonder what you think about that position.
Yeah, that would seem to ring true, because it's always about destruction. You know, it's about tearing down of something, about causing pain through the destruction of, you know, loved ones, or, you know, works of art or whatever. So yeah, I would say that even one thing that I wanted to sort of strip out a little bit, maybe I didn't do so well, was saying that, you know, sort of that art and a sort of dark art, and I thought that's really good point about how it informs your ontology, but that has some kind of edifying quality to it, in that reflective stance of sort of diagnosing a malady in society. Whereas, you know, obviously a very violent nihilistic act is, as you say, it's not creative at all. It's just tearing down of what is good or what's positive.
Yeah. Well, thank you, James. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the question, Chance.
Yeah, because I'm reminded of basically just Mill. I think that's a good point what Mills brought up, because I'm reminded of our discussion about, again, the contrary of love, right? Basically, is this, are we referring to eros or referring to philia? Philia has absolutely, like, it really does, philia, it really does apply, because notice, if it is a wish for the good of the other as other, that wish oasis that's the point. It's imagined in the mind. Like, that's kind of the point. And it's, so you can easily do an inverse for that. So thus, obviously, the hate of that, basically the wish of the non of, actually, if good is the equivalent of existence. So thus, you just switch out good. If that's granted, then wishing the evil of the other means the non-existence of the other. So yeah, that is coherent. It makes, that's perfectly logical. I think a lot of people have problems with Plato for his accounts of how no one can basically desire evil. The argument is made that that's not possible because of an erotic mode of possession of it. Well, because That would mean you would have to possess evil. You would want to possess it. That's the tension. Versus a kind of argumentation of wishing the non-existent, basically the non-good of another, is perfectly, we can all coherently agree to that. That's pretty intelligible for all of us. It's the wishing for the non-existence, because even on the examples here, it's not even pure annihilation. You want to non-exist, and you want to bring everyone down with you. It's still about the other is still included in there. It's not even just purely for oneself. Basically, possession of the good for oneself is taking in, kind of assume, take in. So there's to draw that out. This is the tension point. And it's very commonly tension points with Platonic thought is on this tension point precisely. Harris.
Yes, I really wanted to congratulate James. It was a very thought-provoking essay.
Harris. Thank you.
Yes, yeah. And I really liked also a small detail there, the cultural reference to that movie. So, Seven. I really like that. And instantly in my head, I thought, like, what if James was delivering that particular speech back in ancient Greece, let's say? And I said to myself, then he will be referencing probably one of the tragedies, like Euripides' Vacchi, let's say, for example. So I just wanted to share that small thought there with you. Once again, great talk.
Thanks. No, that's yeah. So with those ones, Harris, are you aware of a particular aspect of those Greek tragedies you mentioned that would fit that with that?
Yeah, basically I thought instantly of Vacchi, because it has to do with all these elements, let's say, with setting things up in order to for the crime, let's say, to get committed. In that particular case, was the murder of King Pentheus from the Menaids in that specific case. But generally speaking, there is a phrase called love-hate tragedy that is a bit common. So I think there is a thread there to be woven.
Thanks.
Harris, can you clarify a little bit more the meaning by love, hate, tragedy in the Greek? Can you give an example? Do you have one just quick on top of your head?
For example, okay, maybe it's not the best one, but as I understand it, in terms of ancient Greek thought, there was always the love and strife, this dipole. So you have the Philotis, the love, and you also have a strife which was Nikos. So Nikos with epsilon iota. So in that particular dipole, we also have things like somewhere in the middle. Like we have the antinomy of friends and enemies, but we also have the word for frenemy. So, that was what popping into mind. So in some instances, maybe someone considers a particular person as their enemy, but he's willing, let's say, to operate into this frenemy mode, and for a specific circumstance, let's say, befriend him or her, so.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Because, for example, people can orient around themselves against what they're basically the enemy. My enemy is my friend, right? There's like that presentation. Yeah, ambivalence. I think Mill's talking about that too in the chat. Yeah, also the need of like basically a kind of weird interaction where you're not wishing the good of the other, right? But you need them. So there's a kind of a sense of dependence on that. So that could be one of the ways we can kind of thread out what that means. These are good points. These are excellent ideas. Excellent. Thank you. Kathleen, floor is yours.
Yeah, I just also wanted to say thank you. Thank you to Mills. I was writing your message, but also now to James. I was like, I only wanted to add something because in therapy, I always work with movement in terms of are people able to transform, to change. And I always use these three categories. Yeah. So in change, we need this total revolution. So that means we have to destroy certain things in our life, completely destroy in order to make something new. And sometimes it can mean the end of, for example, a relationship or something where you start from scratch. Then I also add this dimension of reformation. Yeah, I call it the first one revolution or innovation. The second is called reformation, where you are optimizing things or you are decreasing some things. And then the third dimension is you keep things, you care for them, you want to move them forward. And I find it very interesting, for example, in couple therapy, like some things that appear to be really good, like something that is caring turns out to be really evil because the couple cannot move forward. Like, for example, they have a certain level of politeness, they have a certain level of conformity, they have a certain level of pretending everything is good, but actually underneath there is a revolution that needs to be happening. Whereas evil sometimes in the couple therapy can be really like a cathartic act of, okay, now it's out, it's a destruction in the moment, but something new can be born. I just wanted to give that not as a question, but as food for thought. Yeah, and maybe I would like to have also the paper of the two of you to read again, if that would be possible. Maybe we can share it somewhere. I wanted to mention that.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And what you were saying actually reminded me of something Georgios was on about when he was talking about Christianity and how he was arguing that, you know, the sort of the radicalism of Christ, the self-sacrifice, was something that went beyond sort of the moderation that sort of Plato advised. And it reminded me of this idea of sort of radical sacrifice. And maybe that's something you were getting at there, where there needs to be a radical sacrifice in order to move things forward. And that works in the scenario we're talking about then.
Yeah, and I was also thinking, when I think of Nietzsche, I mean, I didn't spend so much time to understand him, but if, like, I think Kafka said that every revolution in our life left a Kaffeesatz, a leftover of other rules. So I also understand Nietzsche's notion to destroy everything to build something up that has not all the elements of these past revolutions. So I find also something interesting in this quote.
Okay, great. Okay, I think that everyone presented. Yeah, I see public presentations are complete. Harris, I know you, so we'll say at this point, you know, again, I think this was really fun to see the end result. Like, kind of see the, you know, kind of the overlap in thoughts we saw from two of the essays, especially Kathleen and Mills. And I think James is, again, very strong. Again, I think he's applying a thought, more modern thought against the Greek. And we're seeing contentions and challenges about that. I think in particular, as we talked about in the group, the nature of the beautiful, especially if it's convertible, if it's relationship to the good, of superiority of one to the other, and the kind of nature of relationship of generation, right? And destruction and love. So I think that's kind of the tension points we've seen from talking through in these dialogues together. And I will present if it's okay, if it's recorded. Okay. So actually, so Harris, I know you were so you're going to go present. So I'll let you jump in now. Thank you for doing so.
Yeah, I was really motivated by these excellent talks from my colleagues here. And yeah, so The title of my essay is Beyond Words, Unveiling Beauty Through Myth, Storytelling, and the Pursuit of Love in Plato's Dialogues, Cratylus, and Symposium. In Plato's Cratylus, beauty intertwines with the essence of language and names, probing whether words can capture the true nature of things, especially beauty itself, as Socrates explores if a name is in fact a symbol that of the essence of things, let's say, of the essence of the thing. This profound dialogue delves into the limitations of language in expressing the depths of beauty, hinting at its elusive and transcendent nature that defies easy description. Language, as a tool for communication, often falls short when attempting to convey the full spectrum of human experience. Beauty, in particular, is a concept that transcends mere words. It is an experience, a feeling, and an essence that can be felt deeply, but it is challenging to articulate. The dialogue in Cratylus suggests that while names and words strive to capture the essence of things, they are inherently limited. This limitation is especially pronounced when it comes to abstract concepts like beauty, the good and the good and the true, which are often felt more profoundly than they can be described. Beyond the boundaries of language, I believe stands the power of storytelling and also myth, and bridge that leads us closer to understanding beauty. So let us journey then into the myth of Aphrodite's origin, which unveils in detail, shedding light on her divine beauty and that power that comes with that sort of beauty. As Cronus castrated Uranus, a drop of blood descended into the sea, birthing Aphrodite from the foam of the sea in all of her magnificence. And the etymology of her name, Aphrodite in Greek, echoes her emergence from the sea foam, a symbol of unparalleled beauty and grace. Now, this mythological narrative not only provides a vivid image of Aphrodite's birth, but also encapsulates the idea that beauty can arise from chaos and violence, transforming it into something profound and even sublime. Now, let's pause now to envision that ancient statue of Aphrodite from 420 BC, where she stands upon a creature not of the sea, but of the land, namely a tortoise. This creature, unaccustomed to swimming, defies its nature, drawn by Aphrodite's beauty, and rushes into the sea to escort her to the shore. So the tortoise from the land was even faster than the turtles within the sea. So in this small detail, we can see that beauty possesses the power to compel beings to transcend their inherent limitations, blurring in this way the lines between reality and myth. In this narrative lies the essence of storytelling, the ability to weave tales that resonate with truths beyond the grasp of words alone. Mythos, with its transformative power, enable us to perceive beauty in its purest form, transcending the constraints of language, but also logic. Myths serve as a vessel for conveying complex ideas and emotions that are difficult to express through straightforward languages. And they also allow us to explore the depths of human experience and connect with internal truths. And we, of course, remember from our studies that Socrates himself uses the myth as a device in his dialogue. For example, in the case with the myth of the charioteer. So moving on, just as virtue cannot be taught but only recalled, let us remember that beauty, like virtue, dwells in the realm of the ineffable, an eternal urge that beckons us to explore the mysteries of existence beyond mere words. This Platonic idea suggests that beauty and virtue are intrinsic to the human soul, waiting to be rediscovered through contemplation and experience, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be recalled. In Plato's Symposium, Socrates recounts the teachings of the priestess Diotima, who describes the ascent of love through what we call Diotima's ladder. This ladder represents that journey from physical attraction to the appreciation of true beauty and wisdom. As Diotima states, love is the desire for the perpetual possession of the good. There are 6 steps in Diotima's ladder. The first one being the love for a particular body. We move on to the love for all bodies. Thirdly, it is the love for souls. Then we move to the love for laws and institutions. And at this point, I just want to give a short example coming from Athens and from ancient Athens, let's say. So an example of love for laws could be the love of the Athenians for the so-called Sysaxia laws that aimed at the relief of debts instituted by the famous Athenian lawmaker Solon, approximately in the 6th century BC, in order to rectify the injustice that was enforced by slavery back in those ages. So an example of love for institutions could be the love of a student towards the academy, let's say. And here I can imagine the love of a student like Aristotle for Plato's academy. Now, moving onwards to the final 2 steps of Diotima's ladder, we find the love of knowledge, that is the pursuit of wisdom. And finally, we have the love for beauty itself. And one might make the case that this is the love for the forms themselves. Now, by understanding Diotima's ladder, we see that beauty is not just a superficial attribute, but rather a profound journey leading us to higher truths and even wisdom. Just as the myth of Aphrodite illustrates the transformative power of beauty, Diotima's ladder shows us how love can elevate our souls and guide us towards a deeper understanding of the world. The journey up Diotima's ladder serves as a metaphor for personal and spiritual growth. It begins with the most basic and instinctual form of love and progresses towards a more profound and even enlightened appreciation of beauty and wisdom. Each stage represents a step towards self-improvement and a deeper connection with the world around us, but also within us. In the context of modern society, these ideas remain still very relevant. The initial attraction to physical beauty remains a powerful force, but as we grow and mature, we learn to appreciate the deeper qualities that make a person truly beautiful. We begin to value kindness, humility, intelligence, and integrity over physical appearance. This progression mirrors the stages of Diotima's ladder, and that's why I believe that particular dialogue is particularly relevant to this day, because we can see where love evolves from a superficial attraction towards a profound appreciation of the soul. Moreover, the love for laws and institutions highlights the importance of a just and harmonious society. And our world really needs that. The love of knowledge and this pursuit of wisdom, it is also a set of timeless concepts, because we live in an age where information is readily available, and the quest for deeper understanding and truth still remains to this very day a noble pursuit. It encourages us to look beyond the surface and seek out for the underlying principles that govern our world. This intellectual love drives forward innovation, discovery, and even progress, leading us towards a better and more enlightened society. Finally, the love for beauty itself, as the ultimate form of love, reminds us of the importance of striving for the highest ideals. It encourages us to seek beauty in all aspects of life, from the physical to the intellectual, and finally to the spiritual. This pursuit of beauty inspires us to create, to innovate, to improve, and to keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. In conclusion, the exploration of myth, storytelling, and the pursuit of love in Plato's works provides a very enriching, let's say, set of ideas that continue to resonate with us today. The limitation of language in capturing the essence of beauty and the transformative power of myth, and even the journey of love towards higher truths as the forms, all offer valuable insights into the human experience. By understanding and appreciating these concepts, we can strive towards a deeper and more meaningful existence where beauty, the good, and even the true guide us towards a better world. Thank you.
Very good. I am so glad you presented, Harris. Very good. I think definitely by the way, I'm reminded of, I think I remember, Johannes had a lecture at Oxford about mythos, actually, from Plato. So I'm remembering that. Yes.
Careful. It was the other place. Careful. They get very angry, very annoyed. It was Cambridge.
Cambridge. Apologies.
Go on.
Yeah. Go on. Yes. Okay. So with that said, I think definitely I love that imagery of the tortoise, the turtle. I think that was really great. That was nice. I love that addition. That was fantastic. I think the idea of the compelling beyond the limit kind of is a great imagery to try to draw that out. Because immediately I'm reminded of that also the notion of recollection, remembrance not being taught. I think I taught in one of the lectures I talked about it with you. I think in lectures I definitely talked about it. The idea of resemblance, basically, in Aristotle, in rhetoric, the in poetics too. The genius is the one who has the recollection, the eye for resemblances of things they give a new awareness, a new understanding. So I'm reminded of those notes from what you're saying, and the importance of basically generative something new, understanding new realities, and I think also the note of love of laws of institutions. Immediately, I was debating putting it in the lecture series, but never. I decided I opted not to. Was in Credo. There's this line where Socrates, the character, says laws and the love, laws and institutions and goodness and integrity are the greatest possessions of mankind. There's a line of that. So that's just combined right with that dialogue and those notes. I think so, especially that really stood out to me. Like, this is a really great synthesis of the ideas from the course. I think that was really very well done. So I'm really thankful for you sharing. I think it was fantastic. Well, very well made. I think especially as we kind of close in our notes, I think in seminar 4 of the importance of the patterns, paradigma, right? That kind of via analogy, right? If you're going to if we grant that kind of way of thinking about it, of new understandings and new realities that are possible through things that are radically other, right? So the idea is that even though names have a radical otherness to the thing that we're referencing, because they fall, as the Critias dialect shows, it has some notion of dianoia, right? Basically of an ethos. Those things have an attribution to play in the kind of nature of names and how they work, not just connection to the logos or connection to their essence. You can still generate understanding and reality from it. That's kind of the whole shtick. Basically through a relationship, basically common relation, common pattern. There's a way of connection that way, the connective reality. I think that was very well done. Excellent. Yeah. Anyone want to use their hand to share feedback from Harris? All right, 2 at the same time. I'm going to go from what I saw first. Mills, you're up first.
Excellent presentation, Harris. I'm really glad you decided to share with us today. So the way you talked about myth as kind of bypassing language and speaking more directly to us calls to mind. Douglas Headley did a series of lectures on play, and he talked about St. Augustine's notion of the inner word and the outer word. And in this course, Thomas, you talked about the living word and the dead word. So that's coming to mind. Would you say that mythos speaks the language of the inner word?
Definitely, yes. Yes. I believe there is every individual has a whole myth, a mythos that it is associated both with the inner world, let's say, of the individual, but it is also, let's say, a micro representation of the beauty and of the pattern that can be found at the larger environment, let's say. So mythos is unique in that sense that it allows different individuals from different stages of life to connect with these archetypal stories, let's say, as I call them.
Thank you.
There is always something to be drawn out of it. Like as we discussed, that particular George MacDonald quote pops into mind. Like, maybe your meaning is superior to my meaning. So it's always good to discuss and have feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mills.
Very good. James, the floor is yours.
Yeah, again, nice to end on the contemplation of the beautiful there, Harris. And it always seems like you just know these Greek tragedies, etc., by heart, like you're steeped in them. I suppose more of an addition to what you were saying. Funnily enough, I was reading today Lyotard's Why Philosophize, and he has a bit from the Symposium. You were talking about Aphrodite, and he mentions in the Symposium something I thought was really beautiful, in that where does love come from? It's the child between Poros, or plenty, who is a god, and Penia, or poverty, who is a human. And therefore that's where the desire comes from, because there's the gap between them, and that gives rise to love and desire. So I just thought that was, a bit of synchronicity there, which fit nicely.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, James.
That's very well done.
Yeah, and I think it is connected also with this drive towards innovation in this journey. So that's one of the key drivers there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think one of the major attributes of the beautiful that we found as a group and discussing about is the giganomai, right? That kind of newness that is not an additive. Basically, it wasn't just the kind of combinational additive of the elements put together. It's something added new from the part. And the kind of quote from entities up there that it comes at the end, at the completion, at the total, but yet was always there from the beginning. So definitely, I think those were very similar notes there. So very good. Very good. Okay. Any last notes? Anyone else?
Maybe I just also say thank you, Harris. I'm also glad that you presented. I use storytelling in therapy really, or acting out or movement, really to engage on different levels, yeah, because we have these different levels of intelligence, and maybe to bypass the cognition. So when we are listening to stories, I don't have to go through the story in a linear way, because it's like moving very playfully, and I can decide where I enter the story and where I maybe stop, and maybe I stop somewhere because something struck me. So this element of story gives some sort of openness and freedom for the other when to participate, and they will always take something out. So I like that you shared that. But I also do it because I wanted to approach different levels and maybe activate something that moves them forward with regards to knowledge or an idea how to move forward. Yeah, I just wanted to share that because storytelling is a very nice way even to be with, to be present with, because it has a very lively component. And I know some friends of mine, they are Sufis, and Sufis always teach through storytelling. So there is no preaching, but they share stories, and there's always something for everyone wherever they start. So it's a beautiful way of learning.
Thank you, Kathleen, for sharing. Yeah, stories and myths can be very leveled, let's say. And there is, I don't want to call it the meta story, but let's call it the background story. I even find the background story of a story fascinating. Like, for example, in Cratylus dialogue, one of the aspects that I really find fascinating is that Cratylus, the philosopher, was an early teacher of Plato. So in that particular dialogue, or at least from the perspective of Plato, we can see his early teacher having a dialogue with his late teacher. So I find that that background story, let's say, and that small details to be very telling and fascinating. So once again, thank you, Kathleen.
Okay, so that's everybody. So yes, good job. I see. I'm glad we all came together to commune on or development of thought. So I think it was a really rewarding process to see you all tend to take the ideas and discussions together and the dialogues themselves and develop very unique, distinctive interpretations and readings of it, with a lot of great insight and reinforcement of the concepts from the class and the ideas. But sometimes not necessarily always in agreement with what's being presented, but at least with awareness about it. I think that was excellent. So I want to thank you again for being together. I'm sure Johannes is going to gather the essays. If you send them over to him, he'll gather them together and make it available for people to review, and as well as to leave the socials if you want people to follow them on, because I know this will be publicly recorded and published on YouTube. So definitely, again, it's a really rewarding process. Thank you again for being part of the group. It was a pleasure to be part of the Halcyon Guild and to work on this course with you all for the beautiful. It's been a really beautiful experience, to say the least. So I really want to thank you again for your time and contribution and intention to the course. I really appreciate over the past couple of weeks. So with that said, Johannes, is any housekeeping we need to do on your side?
Yeah, thank you all very much. Excellent presentations. If you'd like me to link to either one of your socials or a website or anything of that sort, then please share it with me now in the chat here. And I shared a link to it. I think James has already left the link here. Yeah, really good presentations. If you send them over, I can put them together as a sort of a collected essays. Maybe within a week or so. So don't overthink it, because there's always something else you could add. And yeah, thank you again. And hopefully see you for some Aristotle. After your lofty Platonism here, you need to be grounded. You need to go where Plato comes to fruition in life.
Couldn't say it better myself as a fellow Aristotelian. I would agree. So yes, very good. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend and be in touch. The Discord will stay open. So if you have any other essay pieces you want to work on or anything you want to get in contact with me about, definitely jump on Discord, Friends of the Beautiful, and I'll see you guys there. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.